Hello, anatomy colleagues. This is Dr. Alsip, and in this video, we will be discussing the muscles of the thorax. And these muscles are particularly important in respiration, but they're relatively thin. They're not what we think about a lot of times when we're thinking of muscles, the more robust muscles you have in the appendages. But seeing they have to do with respiration, they are hugely important. We have two learning objectives to work through. Keep these in mind during our discussions and then answer these in your own words at the end. But before we get started, I want to start with some muscles that are very prevalent, very noticeable in this area. And I want to mention them here because they're so visible, but we're actually going to discuss them with the pectoral girdle and the upper limb because that's where their function really is. And these muscles are called axio-appendicular. Think going from the axial skeleton to the appendicular skeleton. These would include the large pectoral muscles, the deltoid, the latissimus dorsi muscles. These are all considered axio-appendicular muscles. Their functions are more so with the appendages, so more to come here, but I did want to note them here because when you're looking at the thorax, they're very visible. Conversely, we have the intercostal muscles that are entirely located within the thorax and very specifically between neighboring ribs. It completely fills in the space between those intercostal spaces. And the major function of the intercostal muscles is maintaining the tonus or the tone of the intercostal space. And these are mainly isometric contractions. Recall, that means you're increasing tone, but you're not producing visible movement of the ribs. And I know that sounds kind of boring, but that tone is hugely important for support of this area and to allow for other structures like the diaphragm and the lungs to function properly and effectively. However, these muscles can produce movement of the ribs, and this typically happens only during forced respiration. Think, taking a deep breath or blowing out a deep breath. That's what I'm meaning in terms of forced respiration. And different intercostal muscles do different things. As we will discuss more in a moment, the primary muscle of inspiration, think breathing in, is the diaphragm. But during forced inspiration, the external intercostal muscles will elevate the ribs and make the thoracic cavity a little larger. Whereas during forced exhalation, the internal intercostal muscles will depress the ribs, and that will make the thoracic cavity a little bit smaller. There is a third set of intercostal muscles, the innermost intercostals. These are going to be just deep to the internal intercostals. They share a similar-esque orientation and function, and they're separated from the internal intercostal muscles by neurovasculature. And I always think of the directionality of the muscle fibers of these muscles as kind of like plywood. So they're going in different directions. The external intercostal muscle fibers are in kind of the same direction as putting your hands in your pocket, whereas the internal intercostal muscles are going to be perpendicular to that or the opposite direction. So you can see how they're kind of lying one on top of the other in these different directions, kind of similar to what you have with plywood. All right, let's move on to the main muscle of respiration, the diaphragm. I love the diaphragm, and I love for students to see the diaphragm to understand just how wide it is. It literally divides or separates the thoracic and the abdominal cavity, but it's also incredibly thin. And it has a double dome of musculature, with that right dome being a little bit higher than the left. And the domes are considered, you hear domes or hemidiaphragm. These are considered the muscular part. And then there's going to be a central aponeurotic part called the central tendon in the middle. And again, it is the main muscle of respiration because keep in mind that exhalation or blowing out means that's mainly passive. Although, as we mentioned, you can have forced exhalation. So the fact that the diaphragm is the primary muscle of inspiration really means it's the primary muscle of respiration in general. And the diaphragm will descend during contraction of the diaphragm and that happens during inspiration. So this causes the thoracic cavity to expand. So you can kind of get an idea of about the size of the thoracic cavity. Whereas when the diaphragm relaxes, which happens during exhalation, the thoracic cavity size is reduced. The diaphragm's innervation is going to be the phrenic nerve, which is derived from spinal nerves C3, 4, and 5. I always remember this with the handy mnemonic C3, 4, and 5. Keep the diaphragm alive. Some good rhyming there. Hopefully that helps you remember. Now, because the diaphragm is literally dividing the cavities into two separate spaces, there are going to need to be openings in the diaphragm to allow for structures to move from the thoracic cavity into the abdominal cavity or vice versa. And these generally aren't large openings at all. They're just large enough to allow the structures to pass through. And the most anterior one will be the caval opening, which is an opening in the central tendon. That central tendon is this whitish portion here in this illustration. So it's an opening in the central tendon. And as its name would suggest, the inferior vena cava, or the IVC, will traverse this region to reach the right atrium of the heart and the thoracic cavity. So the IVC carries deoxygenated blood from the lower body to drain into the heart to eventually make its way to the lungs to oxygenate. The esophageal hiatus will allow the esophagus to pass from the thoracic cavity to the abdominal cavity, where it will transition into the stomach shortly thereafter. So if you've ever heard of a hiatal hernia, this typically happens in the esophageal hiatus region, where portions of the stomach will move into the hiatus and through the hiatus to eventually reach into the thoracic cavity. And so that is the wrong place for the stomach, right? So that's that pathology there. In addition to the esophagus, the vagus nerve trunks will move into and through the esophageal hiatus into the abdominal region, heading towards the abdominal viscera. Lastly, we have the aortic hiatus, which is where the descending aorta will move into the abdomen. It will also transmit the thoracic duct, which is the main lymphatic duct of the body. All right, excellent. Let's do a practice question. Which muscle is most active during forced exhalation? Now remember, exhalation is primarily passive, but one of the intercostal muscles will play a role in forced exhalation. Is it the external or the internal? What do you think? Well, I bet you are all thinking B, internal intercostal muscle, and you're all correct. Very good. Internal intercostals play a role in forced exhalation, and the external intercostal muscles will play a role in terms of forced inspiration. All right, simple enough. Make sure you're reviewing your learning objectives and feeling good about those before moving on to the next video. Thank you all so much for your time and attention.